The lights flickered as High Archivist Zixtal's four-fingered hands moved across the ancient control panel. Sweat dripped from his blue-scaled forehead while he worked to decode the mysterious symbols etched into the station's walls. "Hurry up!" Kelrin shouted over the groaning metal. "This whole place sounds like it's about to fall apart." A shower of sparks erupted from the ceiling, making one of the Luminar technicians yelp. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow through the corridor as main power failed. "No, no, no!" Zixtal slammed his fist on the decoding machine. "We can't lose power now. Hook up the backup batteries." Two technicians rushed forward with portable power cells, connecting cables with shaking hands. The machine hummed back to life, projecting holographic translations into the air. "By the stars." Zixtal's eyes widened as he read the decoded messages. "This can't be right." "What is it?" Kelrin moved closer, ducking under a hanging power cable. "These glyphs, they're from different species, different eras, but they all say the same thing." Zixtal's voice trembled. "Avoid Earth at all costs." The station shuddered violently. Warning klaxons blared through the corridors as the life support systems began to fail. "We need to go, now," a technician screamed. "Just a few more seconds." Kelrin jammed a data crystal into the decoder, his hands shaking as he copied the translations. His face showed a mix of terror and wonder as the files transferred. Metal screamed around them as the station's structure started to buckle. They ran for their ship, the floor plates breaking apart behind them. They blasted clear of the failing station just before it imploded in a burst of sparks and twisted metal. The data crystal clutched in Kelrin's hand seemed to pulse with newfound urgency. With their heartbeats still racing, they set a course for the Luminar Council, where they hoped to make sense of the station's ominous warning. The sleek research vessel Aurora's Edge glided into dock at the Luminar Council headquarters. Its crystalline spires stretched toward the purple sky, catching the light of twin suns and casting rainbow-like reflections across the landing bay. The ship's engines hummed softly as they powered down. Kelrin clutched the data crystal to her chest as they walked through the grand halls, her footsteps echoing off the polished floors. "Do you really think Earth is as dangerous as those warnings suggest?" Her crystalline features flickered with worry in the ambient light. Zixtal's face remained grim, deep lines etched across his features. "We'll know soon enough." His words hung heavy in the air between them. The council chamber doors swung open with a soft whoosh, revealing a semicircle of distinguished luminars seated behind towering desks of translucent crystal. Councillor Marishitan's polished crystalline features caught the light as she leaned forward, her presence commanding attention. "High Archivist, we understand you have findings to present?" Her tone carried both curiosity and caution. Zixtal stepped forward, his voice steady despite his nervousness. Small, crystalline fragments on his skin sparkled with each movement. "Yes, Counselor. We discovered something disturbing in the ancient station." He inserted the data crystal into the chamber's projector with slightly trembling hands. The warnings flashed across the massive screen, each translation more ominous than the last. Ancient symbols transformed into modern text, telling tales of destruction and fear. Worried whispers filled the chamber, growing louder with each new revelation. "Preposterous!" one counselor shouted, jumping to his feet. "These are clearly exaggerations from primitive cultures." "3 different civilizations all warning about the same planet?" another countered, her voice sharp with concern. "We cannot ignore this. The odds of coincidence are too small." Marishitan raised her hand for silence, her authority immediate and absolute. "High Archivist, what do you recommend?" "We must investigate," Zixtal said firmly, standing taller. "But carefully, covertly. If these warnings are true, direct contact could be catastrophic. We've seen what happens to civilizations that rush into first contact." Kelrin stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. "I volunteer to lead the data analysis team. I've studied Earth's transmissions for years, their languages, their cultures. I know them better than anyone." Marishitan's eyes narrowed, studying the young archivist. "You understand the gravity of this task?" The responsibility? Yes, counselor. Kelrin stood straighter, her crystalline edges catching the light. We need answers. Earth could be the key to understanding why so many species vanished from this sector. The council chamber erupted in heated debate. Some demanded immediate withdrawal from Earth's sector, while others insisted on military surveillance. The arguments bounced off the crystal walls, creating a cacophony of concerned voices. Enough! Marishatan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. We will proceed with caution, deploy sensors around the planet, but maintain absolute non-interference. We observe only. No contact, no probes, nothing that could alert them to our presence. The council voted, their crystalline hands glowing as they registered their choices. Blue lights for approval, red for dissent. The motion passed, though several members registered their protests with angry red flashes. Zixtal watched the proceedings silently, his mind racing with questions about Earth's mysterious nature. Whatever secrets that planet held, they would need to tread very carefully to uncover them. Despite the Council's divided stance, they secured permission to begin covert observations. The vessel's engines hummed with readiness, mirroring Zixtal's own restless thoughts. Both curiosity and unease guided their next steps as they departed, determined to see Earth firsthand. From the observation deck of their cloaked vessel, Kelrin stared at the blue-green planet below, her crystalline fingers tapping nervously against the console. It looked so peaceful, almost like a jewel floating in space. Zixtal adjusted the sensors, his crystalline features reflecting Earth's oceans. That's what puzzles me. No sign of the horrors described in the ancient warnings. Not a single indication of the death and destruction we were taught to expect. The research team worked quietly at their stations, monitoring various aspects of human civilization. Cities buzzed with activity, vehicles moved in organized patterns, and satellites circled in neat orbits. The air was tense with anticipation, each researcher waiting for signs of the legendary dangers. "Hi, Archivist," called out one of the technicians, their voice cracking with alarm. "We're detecting massive solar activity. A flare is building up. It's going to be devastating. The radiation levels alone could cripple their infrastructure." Kelrin pulled up the data streams, her eyes widening. "Look at these readings. Their power grids won't survive this. The magnetic interference will be overwhelming." They watched as the news spread across Earth. Instead of chaos, they witnessed something unexpected. Scientists gathered in virtual meetings, engineers mobilized, and governments coordinated their responses. Emergency protocols kicked into action with surprising speed and efficiency. "Who's that human?" Kelrin asked, pointing to a woman leading one of the largest response teams. The human moved with confidence, directing resources and personnel with clear authority. "Dr. Elaine Hughes," Zixtal read from the data feed, leaning forward with interest. "She's implementing some kind of emergency shielding system. Look at how they're reinforcing their power stations." Hour by hour, they watched in amazement as humans around the world worked together. Power grids were reinforced, satellites were repositioned, and backup systems were activated. The coordination between different nations was unlike anything their research had suggested possible. "This doesn't make sense," Kelrin whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "They're so small, so fragile. How are they not panicking? Where's the chaos we expected?" The solar flare struck. The research team held their breath, expecting devastation. Instead, they watched as Earth's hastily assembled defenses held. There was some damage, but nothing like the catastrophe they'd predicted. Cities flickered but didn't go dark. Communications stuttered but didn't fail. "Impossible," Zixtal murmured, his crystal features gleaming with reflected light from the monitors. "These humans, they're not just surviving. They're adapting, working together, solving problems we thought beyond their capabilities. Everything we thought we knew about them seems wrong." The research team stared in stunned silence as Earth continued spinning below them, its light still shining, its people already starting repairs. The sound of data streams and monitoring equipment filled the observation deck as they struggled to process what they'd just witnessed. In the hours that followed, the team pored over every shred of sensor data, each discovery more shocking than the last. Hope and confusion mingled in their minds, hinting at deeper layers to this enigmatic planet. Determined to learn more, they retreated to the data center for a closer look. Inside the research vessel's data center, Kelrin's fingers danced across holographic displays. She organized weeks of observations into neat categories: infrastructure recovery, global communication networks, and emergency response protocols. Her antennae swayed gently as she added subcategories for power grid improvements and civilian response patterns. Their adaptability is remarkable, she muttered, adding another entry with a hint of excitement in her voice. Look at this, High Archivist. They've already improved their power grid shields based on data from the solar flare. They implemented the changes in less than 3 days. Zixtal moved closer, his crystalline form casting rainbow patterns on the display. Several junior researchers stepped aside respectfully as he passed. The ancient warnings painted them as monsters. Yet here they are, building instead of destroying. Every disaster seems to make them more resourceful. On one of their monitoring screens, they watched Dr. Elaine Hughes in her laboratory. Empty coffee cups littered her desk as she spoke into what humans called a secure line. Colonel Reyes, the quantum readings are off the charts, Dr. Hughes said, adjusting her glasses and pointing to a graph on her screen. Something's up there, watching us. The energy patterns are unlike anything in our databases. The stern-faced military officer on her screen nodded. His uniform was crisp, despite the late hour showing on the wall clock behind him. My satellites picked up similar anomalies. Whatever it is, it's using tech we've never seen before. We need answers, Doctor. Kelrin's antennae twitched nervously. High Archivist, there's been a 300% increase in encrypted transmissions from their scientific facilities. They're coordinating something big. Show me, Zixtal commanded, moving to the main display, his crystalline fingers leaving faint trails of light as they moved. Data streams filled the screen, countless human messages bouncing between satellites and ground stations, like a complex web of digital communication. They watched Dr. Hughes send another transmission. Colonel, I'm sending you the latest readings. These signatures don't match any known space phenomena. The pattern suggests intelligent design. Zixtal's crystalline features dimmed slightly, a sign of deep thought. They're looking for us. He turned to his assistant. Kelrin, prepare a formal notice to the Council. We need to extend our observation period. Their progress is too significant to ignore. Already drafting it, Kelrin replied, her fingers flying over the controls with practiced efficiency. Their response to the solar flare alone justifies continued study. Instead of falling apart, they've grown stronger. They're turning their weaknesses into advantages. Back on Earth, Dr. Hughes stared at her computer screen, surrounded by papers covered in complex equations. Half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside her keyboard, she highlighted another unusual energy spike in the orbital data. A smile played across her tired face. Got you, she whispered, marking the coordinates with a red digital pin. Now let's find out what you are. No one can hide forever. Her words echoed through the vessel's speakers as Kelrin replayed the recording, each syllable heightening the team's alarm. Meanwhile, disturbing signals from beyond Earth demanded immediate attention. With concern mounting, they relayed new findings back to the Council. In the dimly lit Council chamber, Councillor Marishatan's crystalline features caught the soft blue light, casting tiny rainbows on the polished walls. This is troubling news, High Archivist, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, fingers drumming a nervous pattern on her desk. Our security systems detected Vorkath probes in our data streams. They were thorough in their infiltration. Zixtal's shoulders tensed, their usual scholarly calm cracking. How much did they access? Enough to be dangerous. Marishtan brought up a holographic display showing communication patterns, red lines crisscrossing like angry veins. They've been particularly interested in your Earth observations. Every scan, every report, they've been drinking it all in. Meanwhile, aboard his command vessel, Captain Voorhas hunched over a decoded transmission, the dim light making his scales gleam like wet oil. His scaled fingers gripped the display edge, claws leaving tiny scratches in the metal. "Death world," he growled, yellow eyes narrowing to slits. "So the humans are that dangerous? A whole planet of warriors?" His lieutenant shifted nervously, tail twitching. "Sir, these are just fragments of data, we can't be sure." "Fragments that paint a clear picture." Voorhas slammed his fist down, making nearby equipment rattle. "A civilization powerful enough to earn such warnings from the Luminars? They must be eliminated before they become a threat. We've seen too many empires rise from such beginnings." Back on the Aurora's edge, Kelrin paced nervously as she reported to Zixtal, her crystalline form catching starlight from the viewport. "The Vorkath signals are getting stronger. They're definitely tracking our observation patterns. I've tried masking our scans, but they're persistent." "We can't warn Earth," Zixtal said, frustration evident in their voice, hands clasped behind their back. "The Council's non-interference directive is absolute, even with this threat looming." In his private quarters, Voorhas addressed his most trusted officers, their scales gleaming in the red battle lighting. "Select our best warriors. We strike fast, we strike hard. These humans won't know what hit them. We'll be remembered as the ones who saved our empire." "But sir," one officer spoke up, crest lowered submissively, "shouldn't we consult Central Command? This is a major operation. By the time those bureaucrats make a decision, Earth could become an empire to rival our own." Voorhas's crest flared with conviction, his bulk casting long shadows. "This is about survival. It's always been about survival." Counselor Merishitan's final message to Zixtal was clear, her hologram flickering with static. "You will maintain your observation post. Document, but do not intervene. Those are your orders. The Council has spoken." As Voorhas's strike fleet slipped away from the Vorkath space station, their engines running dark against the star-filled void, he smiled grimly, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Set course for Earth. We'll cleanse this threat before it can mature. History will thank us for our foresight." That chilling promise echoed through every intercepted transmission, a threat aimed squarely at Earth. Far from Vorkath territory, a single Luminar vessel drifted unseen, torn between strict directives and a growing sense of responsibility. The High Archivist's next decision would reshape more than one species' destiny. Aboard the Aurora's edge, Zixtal's crystalline hands moved swiftly across the holographic displays, each motion leaving trails of light in their wake. The data streams painted a clear picture: 3 Vorkath warships on an intercept course with Earth, their engines burning hot enough to be visible even at this distance. "High Archivist." Kelrin burst into the observation deck, nearly tripping over her own feet in her rush. Her features flickered with anxiety, the crystalline patterns across her face pulsing erratically. "The tracking systems confirmed it. Voorhas leads the fleet himself. The energy signature from his flagship is unmistakable." Zixtal's inner lights dimmed to a dull glow. The Council's directive was absolute: observe, never interfere. But the humans had shown such promise, such resilience. In just the past decade, they'd made technological leaps that took other species centuries. They deserved a chance. "We can't just watch them die," Kelrin said softly, moving closer to the display. Her voice cracked. "They don't even know they're being hunted. Not a single defense system activated." On Earth, inside an underground facility buried beneath miles of rock, Dr. Hughes stared at her monitoring equipment, tapping the screen in frustration. "These readings don't make sense," she muttered, adjusting her glasses for the 10th time. "Lieutenant Patel, can you verify this? I've never seen patterns like these." Lieutenant Suri Patel leaned over the console, her dark eyes narrowing as she studied the data. 3 distinct signatures moving faster than anything we've recorded. They're beyond lunar orbit but closing fast. The energy output is off the charts. Colonel Reyes strode into the room, his boots echoing on the metal floor like drumbeats. His normally relaxed demeanor had vanished. "Talk to me, people. What are we looking at?" Something big is coming, sir, Patel reported, pulling up more detailed scans. And it's not natural movement. These objects are changing course too smoothly, too deliberately. Back on the Aurora's edge, Zixtal paced the deck, his crystalline form casting dancing shadows. Breaking the non-interference directive meant exile at best, imprisonment at worst. But staying silent meant watching millions die, and possibly losing humanity's unique potential forever. "Hi, Archivist," Kelrin pleaded, her young face full of emotion. "Remember how they handled the solar flare? When everyone said they'd lose half a continent? They deserve a chance to defend themselves. They've earned that much." Zixtal stopped pacing. With trembling hands, he began coding a transmission, his fingers leaving ghost-like trails in the holographic interface. "Short, encrypted bursts," he explained. "Maybe they'll understand. They're clever enough. They have to be." The message was brief but clear. "Hostile forces inbound. 3 warships. Prepare." In the Earth facility, alarms blared with sudden urgency. "Incoming transmission," Patel announced, her hands flying across multiple screens. "It's different from anything in our database. The encryption is like nothing I've ever seen." Dr. Hughes rushed to decode it, her fingers flying across the keyboard while complex algorithms ran. "Colonel, you need to see this. The message, it's meant for us." Reyes read the message, his jaw tightening like a steel trap. "Sound the alert. Activate the defense grid. Whatever's coming, we'll be ready. I want every system hot and waiting." "Sir," Patel reported, her voice steady despite the tension, "defense stations worldwide are acknowledging. The hidden networks are coming online. Everything we built after the incident is powering up." Dr. Hughes smiled grimly, a hint of fierce pride in her eyes. "Looks like our mysterious watchers finally decided to talk. Let's show them they made the right choice." Dr. Hughes stared at the decoded message on her screen, her heart racing like a trapped bird. "Colonel, we've got confirmation. Multiple alien vessels approaching Earth's orbit. They're moving fast, at least 30 ships." Colonel Reyes's voice crackled over the secure line, tense but controlled. "Initiate Protocol Omega. Lieutenant Patel, activate the Ghost Network. Let's show them what Earth's really made of." Around the world, military bases hummed to life while keeping civilian channels remarkably calm. News stations reported increased solar activity, a cover story meant to explain any unusual phenomena in the coming hours. Weather services advised people to expect possible radio interference and aurora displays. Lieutenant Patel's fingers flew across her console, executing commands with practiced efficiency. "Ghost satellites deployed, sir. Feeding them outdated specs about our defense capabilities. They think we're still using tech from 50 years ago." High above Earth, aboard the Aurora's edge, Kelrin watched the approaching Vorkath ships with growing dread, her crystalline features reflecting the distant flashes of engine fire. "They're charging weapons," she whispered, "all of them at once." Zixtal nodded grimly, his own crystalline form seeming to dim. "And now we'll see if humans truly deserve their reputation. Watch closely, Kelrin." The first Vorkath blast lit up the night sky over the Pacific like an angry purple star. Captain Vorhas stood proud on his bridge, his scaled chest puffed out as he watched what he assumed would be an easy victory. "Target their primitive defense stations. Show them the might of—" His words cut off as the supposedly vulnerable Earth satellites shimmered and disappeared, replaced by a web of advanced shield technology that sparkled like diamonds against the void. His ship rocked violently as counterfire erupted from hidden Earth platforms, the blasts coming from directions he hadn't even considered defending. "Impossible," Vorhas snarled, gripping his command chair as another blast rattled his teeth. Their technology level was supposed to be centuries behind ours. Where did they hide all this? On Earth, Dr. Hughes allowed herself a small smile as the first wave of defensive missiles found their marks. The Vorkath ship's shields flickered under the assault, their purple energy barriers turning a sickly pink before failing. "Multiple direct hits," Lieutenant Patel reported, her voice steady despite the excitement. Their lead ship is showing significant damage to their port shields. 3 more ships have lost forward defenses. They're scrambling. Colonel Reyes watched the tactical display with satisfaction, arms crossed over his chest. Looks like our visitors brought knives to a gunfight. Keep pressing the advantage. Don't let them regroup. The Vorkath fleet, caught completely off guard by Earth's true capabilities, attempted to regroup. Their formations scattered like startled birds as another barrage of Earth's defensive fire cut through their lines, leaving trails of debris in the void. Aboard the Aurora's edge, Kelrin couldn't contain her amazement, pressing closer to the viewport. They're actually winning. The humans, they're driving them back. Look at those maneuvers. Zixtal watched in stunned silence as humanity's defensive network systematically dismantled the Vorkath attack force. Now he understood why those ancient warnings existed, not because Earth was dangerous, but because its inhabitants were far more capable than anyone could have guessed. Humanity had played the long game, hiding their true strength until the perfect moment. A hush fell across the control centers on both sides, each faction steeling itself for the imminent clash. Weapons charged, final orders rang out, and Earth's defenders locked eyes with the starry void where their foes approached. In the next heartbeat, the war truly began. Colonel Reyes stood in the command center, his face lit by dozens of holographic displays showing Earth's defensive positions. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he watched the enemy ships drift closer. Launch Operation Shadow Dance. Let's show them what our stealth fighters can do. Lieutenant Patel's fingers flew across her console, her movements quick and sure. Deploying Ghost Squadron now, sir. They won't know what hit them. A slight smirk played across her face as she input the final commands. 12 next-generation stealth fighters slipped from hidden hangars across the globe, their launches masked by careful timing and electromagnetic interference. Their surfaces absorbed radar and light alike, making them nearly invisible to conventional detection methods. Each pilot had trained for months for this moment. In orbit, Captain Vorhas gripped his command chair until his scaled knuckles whitened as another warning blared through his bridge. Impossible, he snarled, watching 3 more of his ships report critical damage from enemies they couldn't even see. His tail lashed in fury. These primitives were supposed to be defenseless. His communication officer's scales paled to a sickly gray. Sir, we've lost contact with the Razor Wing. Total systems failure. These humans, they're using tactics we've never encountered. His claws shook as he worked the controls. Vorhas slammed his fist on the armrest, cracking the metal beneath. Open a channel to High Command. Priority 1. His crest flared with barely contained rage. On the Vorkath homeworld, Admiral Shalon reviewed the incoming transmission with growing concern. The footage showed Earth's forces employing sophisticated cloaking technology and weapon systems that shouldn't exist on such a young world. Her staff hurried around her, bringing more disturbing reports. Send me everything, she commanded her staff, mandibles clicking rapidly. Every scrap of data about this planet. Leave nothing out. Back on Earth, Lieutenant Patel smiled as she fed carefully doctored information through channels she knew the Vorkath had compromised. Her fingers danced across multiple screens. Dr. Hughes, the false data packets are transmitting. They'll see exactly what we want them to see. Dr. Hughes nodded, watching the stream of misinformation flow through encrypted channels. Perfect. They'll think our orbital defenses are concentrated in the northern hemisphere, leaving the south seemingly vulnerable. He adjusted his glasses with a satisfied expression. Incoming transmission from Vorkath space, Patel announced, straightening in her chair. They're mobilizing their main fleet. Admiral Shalon is taking personal command. Just picked up their internal comms chatter. Colonel Reyes studied the tactical display, his eyes narrowing as he tracked enemy movements. Just as we predicted, they took the bait. He turned to his staff, his voice steady and confident. Continue feeding them the modified defense plans. Let them think they've found our weakness. In her flagship, Admiral Shalon reviewed the intelligence reports, her claws tapping thoughtfully against her command console. The humans appeared to have advanced technology, yes, but their defensive grid showed clear gaps. With enough ships, they could be overwhelmed. The data seemed perfect, too perfect. This death world must be dealt with, she declared to her war council, rising from her seat. Prepare the armada. We strike with overwhelming force. The admiral's mandibles clicked with determination as she signed the invasion orders, completely unaware that every decision she made had been carefully orchestrated by Earth's military strategists. In the shadows of her command center, junior officers exchanged worried glances, sensing something wasn't quite right about this human prey. With orbit secured for the moment, Earth braced for the next wave of aggression. The Vorkath refused to abandon their invasion, redirecting their forces toward planetary entry. Human forces scattered to defend the surface, prepared to fight in streets and fields alike. Zixtal's crystalline features flickered with frustration as Counselor Merishatan's hologram stood firm, her stern image hovering in the cramped research station. The Council's position remains unchanged, High Archivist. We cannot risk open warfare with the Vorkath Empire. The consequences would be devastating for all involved. But millions of innocent lives are at stake, Kelrin burst out, unable to contain herself. Her own crystal edges flashed with barely controlled anger. We brought this upon them by allowing our data to be intercepted. We might as well have painted a target on their world ourselves. Merishtan's expression hardened, her holographic form seeming to grow taller. Assistant Archivist, remember your place. Our role is to observe, not interfere. The natural development of species must not be disrupted. Back on Earth, Dr. Hughes worked tirelessly in her lab, surrounded by partially dismantled alien tech recovered from previous encounters. Coffee cups and energy drink cans littered her workspace. The electromagnetic pulse generator is ready for testing, she announced to her team, trying to hide her exhaustion. If this works, we can disable their ships without destroying them completely. Less bloodshed that way. Across the globe, Colonel Reyes supervised the final touches on a vast network of underground shelters, his boots echoing through the massive concrete tunnels. How many civilians can we house? He asked Lieutenant Patel, watching workers install the last of the air filtration systems. The bunker cities can protect roughly 60% of Earth's population, she replied, checking her tablet and swiping through detailed schematics. We've stocked them with supplies for 6 months. Water recycling is at 99% efficiency. It feels wrong, Dr. Hughes admitted later during a strategy meeting, pushing her glasses up her nose. We're deliberately letting them think we're weaker than we are, drawing them in closer, like playing possum on a galactic scale. Colonel Reyes nodded grimly, his weathered face showing the strain of sleepless nights. Sometimes the best defense is letting your enemy underestimate you. The Vorkath believe they're hunting prey. They don't realize they're walking into a trap. Their arrogance will be their downfall. On the Aurora's edge, Zixtal watched Earth's preparations with a mix of admiration and concern. The humans were proving themselves far more capable than any species had given them credit for. Their strategy was bold, perhaps even ruthless but effective. They had turned their perceived weakness into an unexpected strength. The main Vorkath fleet will arrive within 48 hours, Kelrin reported, her voice tight with worry as she studied the long-range scans. Admiral Shalon commands at least 300 warships, each one capable of devastating an entire continent. And we must stand by and watch, Zixtal said bitterly, their crystalline form dimming with resignation like a light bulb losing power. The Council fears war more than it values justice. Perhaps they'll learn from this, though I doubt it. Admiral Shalon's massive fleet cut through space, their weapons primed and hulls gleaming with malicious intent. The initial reports of Earth's resistance had only strengthened her resolve. No primitive world would dare stand against the might of the Vorkath Empire. She already imagined the glory of conquest. Little did she know, Earth's apparent vulnerability was a carefully crafted illusion. Hidden EMP weapons waited in orbit, disguised as debris from old satellites and space junk. Underground bunkers housed not just civilians but launch sites for advanced defensive systems. The humans had prepared a welcome their uninvited guests would never forget. Sometimes the best trap was the one that looked exactly like what your enemy expected to find. Yet even as Earth's defenders outmaneuvered their invaders, the toll of battle weighed heavily on all sides. From above, Zixtal watched cities burn and realized mere observation was no longer an option. Risking everything, the High Archivist prepared to intervene. The void of space lit up as massive Vorkath warships materialized near Mars's orbit, their sudden appearance turning the blackness into a deadly light show. Their hulls gleamed with menace, covered in thick armor plates that resembled reptilian scales. The ships moved with an eerie grace despite their enormous size, arranging themselves in an attack formation that cast long shadows across the red planet below. Admiral Shalon's face appeared on screens worldwide. Her scaled features twisted into what might have been a sneer, her sharp teeth glinting in the harsh light of her bridge. Humans of Earth, your resistance is futile. Surrender now, and we may spare some of your population as servants. Those who submit will live to serve the glory of the Empire. In his command center, Colonel Reyes straightened his uniform and nodded to Lieutenant Patel. The room hummed with tension, but his people moved with practiced efficiency. Send our response, global broadcast. Moments later, Reyes appeared on screens across Earth and in every Vorkath ship. His voice was steady, almost casual, as if he were discussing the weather rather than facing an alien invasion. This is Colonel Alejandro Reyes speaking on behalf of Earth. We reject your ultimatum. Earth stands united, and we will defend our home. You might want to reconsider your next move. In her flagship's command center, Admiral Shalon's tail twitched nervously. The humans showed no fear. Their cities weren't panicking. Their military installations remained calm and organized. Something felt wrong about their confidence. Admiral! Captain Vorhas's voice crackled through the comm, filled with bloodthirsty eagerness. They're bluffing. Their primitive defenses cannot withstand our might. We must strike now, while they're exposed. Let me lead the attack. Shalon's claws drummed against her command chair, the sharp tips leaving tiny scratches in the metal. Launch the fighter squadrons. Test their resolve. The first wave of Vorkath fighters streaked toward Earth, their engines leaving bright trails in the void. As they approached, seemingly harmless communication satellites suddenly transformed. Hidden panels slid open, revealing advanced weapon systems that had been perfectly concealed for years. Dr. Hughes watched from her lab as the orbital platforms came online, her fingers dancing across multiple holographic displays. Defense grid active, she reported, a small smile playing on her lips. All systems nominal. Brilliant beams of energy lanced out from Earth's platforms, filling space with deadly light. Vorkath fighters exploded or spun away, their systems scrambled by precisely targeted electromagnetic pulses. The survivors scattered in disarray, their formation broken. Shalon slammed her fist down, cracking her command console. Impossible. They're more advanced than our intelligence suggested. Her yellow eyes narrowed to slits, burning with fury. Vorhas, you assured me they were vulnerable. They must have hidden their true capabilities, Vorhas snarled through the comm, his voice thick with rage and embarrassment. But it doesn't matter. No primitive species can stand against the full might of the Vorkath Empire. Shalon rose from her command chair, rage burning in her chest as she watched more fighters fall to Earth's defenses. All ships, battle formations. We will crush these humans and take their world by force. Begin the assault. The massive Vorkath armada moved forward, weapons charging as Earth's defense forces stood ready for the coming storm. The space between Mars and Earth crackled with building energy, promising a battle that would be remembered for generations to come. The transmission hung in the air like a promise, urging the Vorkath to lay down their arms. Yet not all would heed the call. In the ruins below, rage still fueled a final, desperate stand. The battle for Earth erupted in flashes of light that rivaled the stars themselves. From their cloaked observation post, Kelrin pressed her crystalline hands against the viewport, watching in awe as humanity's defenses sprang to life. The void of space lit up with countless explosions, turning the darkness into a deadly light show. I don't understand, she whispered to Zixtal, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and wonder. Their ships are so small compared to the Vorkath fleet. They're like insects against giants. Zixtal's crystalline features reflected the distant explosions, tiny lights dancing across his face. Size isn't everything, young one. Watch and learn. Humans have always found ways to punch above their weight. Below them, Dr. Hughes sat in her command center, surrounded by holographic displays that bathed her face in blue light. Her fingers flew across control panels as she directed swarms of automated drones, each movement quick and sure. "Pattern Delta 7, she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. The drones split apart like a school of fish, adapting their formation mid-flight to dodge incoming fire, moving with an almost organic grace. Colonel Reyes's voice crackled over the comm, filled with urgency. "Hughes, we need those EMPs ready now. We're getting hammered out here." "Checking Earth's magnetic field strength," she responded, her eyes fixed on the readings that scrolled past at dizzying speeds. "Lieutenant Patel, are the amplifiers in position?" From her station, Patel confirmed, "Ready on your mark. All systems green." The massive Vorkath ships loomed closer, their weapons carving bright lines through space like angry red scratches. Admiral Shalon's flagship led the charge, its hull bristling with gun ports that gleamed menacingly in the starlight. "Now!" Hughes shouted, slamming her hand down on the control panel. Hidden satellites activated in perfect sequence, a web of technology springing to life. The Earth's magnetic field twisted and pulsed, multiplying the power of the human EMPs. Waves of invisible energy washed over the Vorkath fleet like a silent tide. Ships began to drift, their systems scrambled like eggs in a pan. Confusion spread through their ranks as communications failed, leaving them blind and deaf in the void. But the capital ships, heavily shielded, pushed through the electromagnetic storm like battleships through rough seas. "Their main ships are still coming," Patel reported, her voice tight with tension as she gripped her console. "Shields at 40%. We can't take much more of this." On the bridge of her flagship, Admiral Shalon gripped her command chair, mandibles clicking in frustration. "Press the attack. These humans cannot stand against our might forever. Crush them." The Vorkath capital ships, though bleeding atmosphere and trailing debris like wounded beasts, maintained their relentless advance. Their massive guns thundered, overwhelming several of Earth's defensive positions in balls of fire. From orbit, Kelrin watched in horror as sections of the human fleet erupted in flames, turning into brief, bright stars before fading to nothing. "They're losing. We have to do something." "Perhaps," Zixtal mused, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against his arm. "But notice how they fight. Not with blind aggression, but with strategy, with unity. They move as one, each piece supporting the others." The remaining Vorkath capital ships, their hulls scarred and burning like meteors, began their descent toward Earth's atmosphere. Colonel Reyes stood in his command center, watching their approach on the main screen with steely eyes. His jaw set in determination as he opened a channel to all Earth forces. "All units prepare for ground engagement. This is what we trained for. Let's show them what happens when they pick a fight with humanity." At the edge of the battlefield, a single gesture could tip the scales toward destruction or diplomacy. As reinforcements and medics hurried to help the wounded, a fragile calm began to settle. All eyes turned to see if mercy could prevail. The Vorkath warships pierced Earth's atmosphere like burning meteors, their massive hulls glowing red-hot from entry. The fleet's shadow cast dark patterns across the clouds below, a deadly light show that made even veteran soldiers pause in awe. Captain Vorhas stood at his command post, mandibles clicking with anticipation as his troops prepared for ground assault, his scaled fingers drumming against the polished metal of his control panel. "Deploy all ground forces," he bellowed, eyes gleaming with bloodlust. "Show these humans what real warfare looks like. Leave nothing standing." But Earth was ready. Colonel Reyes had positioned his forces in ways that made no sense to the Vorkath military mindset. Instead of massing troops in obvious defensive positions, humanity's soldiers were scattered across cities, forests, and mountains. They hid in plain sight, blending with civilians and the landscape itself. Sir? Lieutenant Patel's voice crackled over the comm, barely containing her excitement. Broadcasting Operation Ghost now. They're taking the bait. Across all frequencies, elaborate technical specifications for non-existent superweapons flooded Vorkath communications. Detailed schematics showed planet-killer devices that made Admiral Shailon's scales ripple with fear. The data stream was overwhelming, each file more terrifying than the last. On the ground, the reality was just as devastating. Vorkath troops, used to direct confrontation, found themselves ambushed from sewers, rooftops, and hidden bunkers. Their rigid battle formations crumbled against humans who refused to fight properly. Every street became a potential trap, every building a possible ambush point. "This is madness," Shailon hissed, watching through surveillance feeds as another battalion fell into a carefully laid trap. "They're everywhere and nowhere. How do they keep doing this?" Meanwhile, ordinary citizens became an integral part of Earth's defense. Teenagers on bicycles carried medical supplies through back alleys, using their knowledge of neighborhood shortcuts. Grandmothers coordinated safe houses via encrypted apps, their knitting circles transformed into intelligence networks. Delivery drivers formed supply chains that kept Earth's forces mobile and well-stocked, using their intimate knowledge of local roads and hidden paths. "Admiral," one of Shailon's officers reported, his voice shaking, "we're losing ground in every major theater. These humans, they fight like water, flowing around our strengths, drowning our advantages. We can't pin them down." Vorkath slammed his clawed fist against a console, cracking its surface. "Impossible. They're supposed to be primitive. We must push harder. We must—" "Enough!" Shailon cut him off, tail lashing in agitation. "This is becoming a massacre of our forces. We should retreat while—" "No!" Vorkath snarled, spittle flying from his jaws. "Better to die with honor than flee from these creatures. We must have vengeance." But across the globe, the Vorkath found themselves increasingly boxed in. Their superior technology meant little against enemies who turned city streets into mazes and forest paths into death traps. Every time they adapted to one human tactic, 3 new ones appeared. The invaders' frustration grew with each passing hour. Dr. Hughes coordinated from her underground command center, watching the battle unfold on multiple screens while sipping cold coffee. "The misinformation is working," she reported to Reyes, allowing herself a small smile. "They're so busy looking for our fake superweapons they can't see our real strengths. Their own fear is doing half our work for us." Humanity's true power wasn't in their weapons. It was in their unpredictability, their ability to adapt, and their unwavering unity in the face of invasion. The Vorkath, for all their military might, had never encountered an enemy quite like this. They had expected an easy conquest but found themselves facing a species that turned their very civilization into a weapon. With the final shot fired and negotiations underway, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. The surviving Vorkath and humans now stood shoulder to shoulder, repairing the damage of war. In distant halls of knowledge, the real story of Earth was about to be rewritten. From the Aurora's edge, Sixtal watched the battle unfold with growing horror. Despite council protocols demanding non-interference, he couldn't stand idle any longer while 2 species tore each other apart. "Kelrin, open a channel to Admiral Shailon's flagship," he ordered, his voice trembling but determined. His assistant's crystals flickered with nervous energy as she worked the communications array. On Earth, Dr. Hughes stood in a bustling command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the ongoing conflicts. Military personnel rushed between stations, their faces lit by the blue glow of tactical readouts. "Colonel, the thermal disruptors are ready. All units report green." Colonel Reyes nodded grimly, his weathered face reflecting years of difficult decisions. "Deploy them globally. Remember, stun settings only. We're not here to slaughter anyone. We're better than that." The new weapons activated simultaneously across every battlefield. Invisible waves of carefully tuned energy washed over Vorkath positions worldwide. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Vorkath soldiers stumbled and swayed, their natural temperature regulation thrown into chaos. Their scaled bodies, usually perfect instruments of warfare, became clumsy and uncoordinated as their internal heating systems went haywire. "What sorcery is this?" a Vorkath commander croaked before collapsing into the mud, conscious but unable to fight. Around him, his troops fell like dominoes. Lieutenant Patel monitored the weapon's effects from her station, her fingers dancing across multiple screens. "It's working, sir. Minimal casualties, maximum disruption. The Vorkath forces are paralyzed but unharmed. They'll have one hell of a headache tomorrow, though." Meanwhile, Zixtal's transmission finally reached Shalon's bridge. "Admiral, please listen. This conflict is pointless. The humans aren't your enemy. They're defending their home. They never wanted this fight." Shalon watched in disbelief as more reports flooded in. Her mighty army lay helpless, yet alive. The humans had the power to kill them all but chose not to. Her clawed hands gripped the command chair tightly. "My troops," she whispered, scales dulling with concern. "They're alive?" "Yes," Zixtal confirmed, his crystalline features reflecting the starlight. "The humans possess the ability to annihilate your forces, but they're showing mercy. They're offering you a chance to end this without further bloodshed." Captain Vorhas burst onto the bridge, his scales flushed with rage and his crest fully extended. "We cannot surrender to these primitives. We must fight to the last warrior. Better to die than face such shame." But Shalon saw the truth now. Her soldiers were at the humans' mercy, yet instead of execution, they faced only temporary incapacitation. This wasn't the behavior of bloodthirsty savages. It showed wisdom and restraint she hadn't expected from such a young species. "The humans," she said slowly, her voice heavy with realization, "they could have killed us all. Instead, they chose to show mercy." "Admiral," Vorhas snarled, stepping closer with clenched fists, "you cannot." "Enough!" Shalon roared, rising to her full height. "Look at our forces. Look at what these primitives have done. They've defeated us without massacring us. They've shown more honor than we have. They fight like warriors but show mercy like saints." From his ship, Zixtal pressed his advantage. "Admiral, you can save your people. The humans will accept your surrender. They don't seek vengeance. They only want peace. End this madness before it's too late." Through the smoke-filled streets of the ruined city, Captain Vorhas led his last remaining troops in a desperate charge. Buildings crumbled around them as Earth's defense forces held their ground, laser fire lighting up the dark clouds of debris. The once proud Vorkath warriors were down to barely 100 fighters, their superior numbers whittled away by human ingenuity and fierce determination. "Push forward!" Vorhas roared, his scaled crest flaring with rage as he fired wildly at the human positions. "Show these humans the might of the Vorkath. We will not be defeated by mere primitives." Inside the command center, Colonel Reyes watched the battle unfold on multiple holographic displays, each showing a different sector of the city under siege. "They're breaking through Sector 7, he reported grimly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Dr. Hughes, we need those disruptors recharged now. Without them, they'll overrun our eastern flank." Above the chaos, the Aurora's edge descended through Earth's atmosphere, breaking every protocol the Luminar Council had established. Zixtal's hand shook as he guided the ship down, his crystalline features reflecting the fires burning below. Warning alerts flashed across every screen, but he ignored them all. "High Archivist, this is madness," Kelrin pleaded, gripping her seat as the ship bucked through turbulence. "The Council will never forgive this interference." "Enough death," Zixtal replied firmly, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "If the Council exiles me for this, so be it. I won't watch another world burn because of our mistakes." The ship landed in a cleared area between the battle lines, crushing debris beneath its landing struts. Zixtal emerged, raising his arms in the universal gesture of peace. Both sides hesitated, weapons still raised, the air thick with tension and smoke. Dr. Hughes stepped out from behind a defensive barrier, her face streaked with dust and dried blood. "I'm Dr. Elaine Hughes," she called out, her voice carrying across the battlefield. "Are you here to talk? I am High Archivist Zixtal of the Luminar. This bloodshed must end. We've all made terrible mistakes." They met in the middle of the war-torn street, each step careful among the rubble. Around them, the sounds of battle continued, but seemed more distant now, as if the universe itself held its breath. "The ancient warnings," Zixtal began, his crystalline form catching the light of nearby fires. "Every civilization we've studied left messages about Earth, about humanity. We thought you were monsters. We were wrong." Dr. Hughes smiled sadly, brushing ash from her sleeve. "We found those warnings too, carved into ruins on Mars. That's why we prepared. We knew someone would eventually come, thinking us weak or wanting to strike first. The writings spoke of our potential for violence, but they missed our capacity for peace." "You knew? All this time?" Zixtal's voice carried equal measures of shock and admiration. "We built our defenses quietly, waited, watched. When we detected your observation ships, we knew it was time. We hoped for peaceful contact, but we prepared for war." An explosion rocked a nearby building, showering them with concrete dust. Through the haze, they could see Vorhas rallying his troops for another push, his battle cry echoing off broken walls. "Help me establish a peace corridor," Dr. Hughes said urgently, her eyes never leaving the Vorkath positions. "There's been enough fighting. Too many dead on both sides." Zixtal nodded, activating his comm device with steady fingers. "Admiral Shalon, this is High Archivist Zixtal. I request an immediate ceasefire zone. The humans wish to negotiate." As they worked to create a safe passage, Vorhas's troops remained in their positions, refusing to stand down. The peace was fragile, balanced on a knife's edge, with the fate of two species hanging in the balance. Behind them, Kelrin emerged from the ship, datapad in hand, ready to record what could be either a historic peace or the prelude to more bloodshed. Through the rubble-strewn streets, Earth medical teams rushed forward, carrying boxes of bandages and plasma bags toward injured Vorkath soldiers. The alien warriors watched in stunned confusion as human doctors treated their wounds with the same care given to Earth's own troops, using advanced medical scanners and gentle touches, despite the aliens' fierce appearances. "I don't understand," a wounded Vorkath lieutenant growled at Dr. Hughes as she carefully wrapped his injured arm. His scales bristled with tension. "We came to destroy you. Why help us?" "We would not do the same." "Because that's what humans do," she replied simply, securing the bandage with practiced hands. "We help those who need it, enemy or friend." In orbit, Admiral Shalon's voice crackled over the comm systems, tinged with weariness. "All Vorkath forces, stand down immediately. The battle is over. We have been misguided." But in his fortified position deep within the city ruins, Captain Vorhas crushed the communicator in his clawed hand, sparks flying. "Cowards!" he snarled at his loyal squad, their armor still smoking from battle. "They've gone soft. We'll show them what real warriors do." He pulled up schematics of Earth's primary command centers on his tactical display, his eyes gleaming with hatred. At the makeshift peace conference in a hastily cleared operation room, Zixtal stood between Admiral Shalon and Colonel Reyes. Her crystalline features caught the light as she spoke. "The humans have shown remarkable restraint," the High Archivist explained. "They could have used far more devastating weapons, but chose to minimize casualties on both sides. Their orbital defenses alone could have wiped out half our fleet." Shalon's scaled features showed genuine surprise, his head crest twitching. "The ancient warnings. They called Earth a death world. We assumed." "You assumed we were monsters," Colonel Reyes finished, arms crossed. "But being strong doesn't mean being cruel. We learned that lesson centuries ago." An urgent alert flashed across their screens, bathing the room in red light. Lieutenant Patel's voice came through. Sir, we've detected Vorkath infiltration teams near 3 command hubs. Vorhas is making his move. They're heavily armed. Dr. Hughes rushed in with a tablet displaying thermal readings, her lab coat fluttering. We can track them through their unique heat signatures. A small team could intercept them before they reach critical areas. I know where Vorhas will be, Shylon interrupted, standing straighter. He's predictable in his pride. He'll lead from the front, thinking it's brave. Let me help you stop him. Colonel Reyes nodded, activating his tactical comm with a quick gesture. Alpha Team, gear up. We're ending this. But we're doing it right. Non-lethal takedown only. Stun weapons and containment fields. Show them what humanity really stands for. As the rapid response team mobilized, their boots echoing down the halls, Zixtal watched with growing understanding. The ancient warnings about Earth weren't wrong. Humans were indeed formidable. But their true strength lay not in their capacity for violence, but in their ability to choose peace even when victory through force was within their grasp. Her crystalline fingers traced ancient symbols in the air, marking this moment for the archives. Through night vision goggles, Lieutenant Patel studied the holographic readout of the city's underground infrastructure, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the glowing lines. Her handheld scanner pulsed with an urgent red warning, its quiet beeping growing more insistent by the second. The device's screen flickered with interference from the damaged power grid around them. Colonel, I've got multiple signatures. Vorhas planted fusion detonators near our nuclear storage facilities, she whispered into her comm, throat tight with worry. Her free hand gripped her weapon tighter. If those go off, the chain reaction would tear half the planet apart. Colonel Reyes finished grimly, his weathered face looking even more haggard in the dim light. Deep lines creased his forehead as he considered their options. He motioned to his strike team, their shapes barely visible in the darkness, each soldier moving with practiced stealth. Move in, silent takedowns only. We can't risk spooking them. They crept through the ruins, past overturned vehicles and crumbling buildings that still smoldered from earlier battles. The acrid smell of burnt metal and concrete filled their nostrils. Ahead, scaled figures moved in the shadows. Vorhas's personal guard, their armor gleaming dully in the faint starlight. Steam hissed from their environment suits, designed for their cold-blooded biology. The first fight erupted without warning. A Vorkath warrior spun around, thermal sensors detecting the human team through the cold night air. Its head crest flared in alarm. Reyes rolled under a plasma burst that lit up the darkness like lightning, coming up with his stun baton crackling and humming with energy. 2 more guards joined the fray, their weapons charging with an ominous whine as they moved to surround the humans. Dr. Hughes, we've engaged the outer perimeter, Patel reported, ducking behind a fallen column as energy bolts scorched the air around her. Chunks of concrete rained down from near misses. How's the disarm sequence coming? In a makeshift command center nearby, Hughes's fingers flew across holographic controls, sweat beading on his forehead. Empty coffee cups littered his workspace. These devices are linked. One wrong move and they all blow. I need time. Just keep them busy. And try not to die. The paperwork would be awful. Reyes's team pushed forward room by room, corridor by corridor, using hand signals and practiced formations. The close-quarters combat was brutal but precise, their movements perfectly coordinated after months of drilling together. Their non-lethal weapons dropped Vorkath soldiers efficiently, leaving unconscious bodies in their wake. Each fallen enemy was quickly secured with restraints. They found Vorhas in a basement command center, surrounded by blinking detonator controls and holographic displays. His scaled face twisted with rage, yellow eyes blazing with hatred. The room hummed with power from jury-rigged generators. You think showing mercy makes you strong? He snarled, clawed hand hovering over the trigger mechanism, scales bristling with contempt. His tail lashed back and forth in agitation. You'll regret not killing us when you had the chance. Your weakness will be your undoing. Now, Dr. Hughes, Reyes shouted, his voice echoing off the metal walls. Hughes's override signal pulsed through the network like a digital tidal wave. The detonator's lights flickered and died one by one, their threatening hum fading to silence. Vorhas roared in fury, but before he could reach for his weapon, Patel's stun blast caught him square in the chest, blue energy crackling across his armor like lightning in a bottle. The Vorkath captain crashed to the ground as his remaining guards lowered their weapons, seeing their leader fallen and their final plan thwarted. The fight drained from their postures as reality set in. Their head crests drooped in submission. Over the comms, Admiral Shylon's voice rang out, clear and authoritative. All Vorkath forces stand down. I repeat, stand down. The war is over. The words echoed through every channel, marking the end of humanity's first interstellar conflict. In a makeshift conference room, once a museum's grand hall, Admiral Shylon sat across from Earth's delegation. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, casting long shadows across tables hastily assembled from salvaged furniture. Dust motes danced in the light beams, giving the somber meeting an almost dreamlike quality. The walls still bore scorch marks from recent battles, and a cool breeze whistled through cracks in the ancient stonework. Your terms are unexpected, Shylon said, her scaled hands trembling slightly as she reviewed the document. You offer aid to our wounded? Shelter for our displaced soldiers? After everything we've done? Her voice carried equal parts disbelief and shame. She glanced at her own reflection in a shattered display case, unable to meet the human's eyes. Dr. Hughes nodded. We understand the cost of war. Healing begins with compassion, Admiral. She gestured to the rubble outside. There's been enough destruction. Let's focus on rebuilding together. Her voice was soft but firm, like a parent soothing a frightened child. Zixtal stepped forward, crystalline features catching the morning light. I must share something crucial. Those ancient warnings about Earth, we misinterpreted them completely. They weren't warnings about aggression or savagery. Her voice carried the weight of someone admitting a grave mistake. Her normally perfect posture slumped slightly with the burden of her words. Then what were they? Colonel Reyes asked, leaning forward with interest. The old wooden chair creaked under his movement. They were warnings about humanity's extraordinary ability to unite, to forge bonds even with former enemies. Once humans make allies, those alliances become unbreakable. That's what made other species fear you. She paused. They feared not your weapons, but your capacity for friendship. Her crystal edges flickered with embarrassment at the admission. Kelrin, who had been quietly observing, couldn't contain herself any longer. She activated her comlink to the Luminar Council. Counselor Merishatan, you must see this. Everything we assumed about humans was wrong. They're not dangerous because they're violent. They're remarkable because they're capable of turning enemies into friends. Her youthful enthusiasm bubbled through every word. She nearly knocked over her datapad in her excitement. On the holographic display, Merishitan's expression softened. Perhaps it's time for the Luminar to reconsider our policy of isolation. She straightened her shoulders. We've hidden in the shadows for far too long. The usual stern lines of her face melted into something almost hopeful. Admiral Shylon picked up the stylus, her clawed hand hovering over the ceasefire agreement. My people attacked yours without provocation, yet you offer help instead of punishment. Her scales shifted color slightly, reflecting her inner turmoil. That's what humans do, Colonel Reyes said simply. We build bridges, not walls. Besides, he added with a slight smile, holding grudges takes too much energy, and we've got better things to do with our time. With a decisive motion, Shylon signed the document. The war was officially over, and a new chapter was beginning. Outside, the first rays of sunset painted the sky. In the restored archives chamber of the Galactic Archaeological Society, Zixtal's crystalline fingers moved carefully across the holographic interface, each gentle tap sending ripples of light dancing across the ancient console. The familiar hum of ancient data cores filled the room as she worked on her final report, their steady drone a reminder of countless generations of knowledge stored within. Kelrin watched from nearby, her usual enthusiasm tempered by the weight of recent events. Her own crystalline features caught the soft blue glow of the surrounding screens. "Are you certain about changing the records, High Archivist? The Council might not approve." "More certain than I've ever been," Zixtel replied, continuing to type without hesitation. The warnings were never about fear. They were about respect. We just didn't understand the difference. On Earth, teams of humans and Vorkath worked side by side, clearing rubble from city streets. The sound of laughter mixed with the whir of machinery as former enemies joined forces in the cleanup effort. Admiral Shalon stood with Dr. Hughes watching a joint medical team treat wounded from both sides, their efficient cooperation a stark contrast to the battles of weeks past. "I still struggle to understand," Shalon admitted, shaking his head in wonder. "In victory, you choose to help us rebuild? After everything?" Dr. Hughes smiled gently, watching as a human doctor showed a Vorkath medic how to use Earth medical equipment. "That's exactly why the ancient civilizations left those warnings. Not because we're dangerous, but because we're unpredictable in the best way possible. We surprise even ourselves sometimes." At the temporary Earth Council headquarters, Councillor Merishitan's arrival caused quite a stir. Her polished crystalline form drew curious glances from human staff members as Colonel Reyes led her through security. Some whispered in awe, others waved friendly greetings. "I must admit," Merishitan said, watching a group of children press their faces against a window to get a better look at her, "our interpretation of Death World was deeply flawed. We expected monsters, but found teachers instead. The irony isn't lost on me." "Sometimes the strongest defense isn't a weapon," Colonel Reyes responded, nodding to a passing security team, "but the willingness to extend a hand after the fighting stops. It's harder to hate someone who's helping rebuild your home." Back in the archives, Zixtal finished her entry with careful attention to detail. "Let it be known throughout the galaxy. Earth stands not as a world to be feared, but as a testament to the power of resilience and reconciliation. Their strength lies not in destruction, but in their remarkable capacity to forge unity from conflict. Approach with respect, for in humanity, you find the ability to defy impossible odds and turn enemies into allies." She paused, looking at Kelrin with a mix of pride and hope. "Future generations need to understand this truth. All of it."